picturing how Elijah might have felt if God was in the great and strong wind that tore into the mountains. Noticeable were goosebumps that reiterates the extremity of my fears. Fear is intensified as I wondered how he felt if God was to be in the earthquake and fire as well. Speaking of it, even now sends chills down my spine. Beautiful was the view as my eyes spotted his face wrapped in his mantle as he realized that God was in the still small voice. Touring through Psalms got interesting as I tried to wrap my brains behind David's description of God's voice. In awe, I watched him make melodies on how powerful the voice of God is. Licking my lips, I wanted the Father's cheeks to receive my kiss. As I watched his every utterance move around me like petals of flowers carried by the wind, I became mesmerized by his accolades for God's voice. The voice of God is full of majesty, he sang. The voice of God breaks the cedars, he sang. The voice of God divides the flames of fire, he sang. The voice of God shakes wilderness, he sang. The voice of God makes the deer guest bed, he sang. The voice of God strips the forest bare, he sang. His precision in every description is one that plays in my mind like an unstoppable music. With David's description, I gotta say the Father's vocal cords are exceptionally amazing. A voice that can break, divide, shake, create, and even strip is worth speaking about for a lifetime. His gesture of love, seen in his movements in our lives, is simply breathtaking. Wonderful is his every mind. Further tour in the Gospel of John leaves me in a state of being more intrigued. A journey where I got to behold the Messiah do what only he can do. Being stunned at how he could transform water into wine, give sight to the blind, and the mystery behind the wisdom in his teachings. I got so struck with the whole aura around his voice. As I watched him speak weightier messages to the crowd, I stood there amazed at how his voice could travel wide distances to people even afar off. Beautiful was the scenery as I watched those powerful words ride on his voice to pierce the hearts of men and usher them into a realm where the mind of God alone echoes in their heart. The crowd that followed him wherever he went loudens the obvious reason, which is every individual could hear his every teaching. Well, that alone in itself is mind-boggling. Being the sheep of God, I got so concerned when he started talking about how his own sheep hears his voice. As the thought of hearing his voice began to be presented to me as a choice, the analogy of choosing to listen to my earthly father being an option got me to revisit that thought. By default, I must hear his voice, even as I don't have an option in hearing my earthly father speak. In reality, a teenager like me, with all my flaws, has actually heard his voice in a way. As reminiscent of my own life came into play, I began closing my eyes perfectly to recall moments I heard his voice. Was it sweet? Was it stern? Was it harsh? How did I even feel? These were the questions that moved through this tiny skull of mine as I had my own flashback. For some time, everything felt so dark. As pieces of the broader picture began to be put together during my period of review, all I could do was show gratitude to God for such a view he gave me a chance to behold in order to attest to the truth that his sheep knows his voice. Now the big question here is the voice of God to me. Personalizing matters related to the Father is key. The voice that rises in my conscience to always get me to do the right thing. The voice clothed in optimism. The voice that reshuffles my priorities when I misplace them. The voice that pulls down every wall of lie concerning my identity. The voice that beautifully spans everything into existence. The voice that ignores the accusations of the accuser and still decides to stay by me. The voice that never gets exhausted in telling me the extent of his love for me. The voice of God is simply the sweetest melody I'm gonna listen to for the rest of my life. In our hearts is echoing love.